Well, I don't really know how I know this, but we had to do another masterclass as soon as we could so we could say that we got approximately 1 hour out of it. I don't know if that talk's going to go that long, but it looks like we may have to surface around the fact that this one could get us interrupted. So we're going to go through it in about 30 minutes and retake if we have to. Phantomas, check this out. This is 1913. Fouillard, I keep mentioning him. He used to nail his cameras to the ground to get a theatrical shot, but that he did trick shots and trapeze doors within the shot was always his way of saying Méliès is great. But when he's starting to get poetically real, that is by turning the supernatural into the physical, is why he brings down the metaphysics to the transcendent. And that's why these vampires can fly, they can drink blood, but the real truth about them is they aren't vampires in a supernatural sense. That is, they're French thieves in the middle of this French epic, which is one of the first feature films ever made, though it's told in 5 parts, and it's Phantomas, and everybody went to see it in like real 20-minute pieces of this like nearly 4.5 hour, 5 hour film. That every piece is more like an hour is because that was the way he pieced it out to seem. And then you look back and see that some pieces are shorter than the other, and some pieces in Les Vampires, which this is a prequel of a remake, Team In, of what would later become a superhero named Judex. And of all the discovered films of Fouillard, there are others like that come in his wake and are these beautiful, gifted films that we have left of him. He may have been the most prolific filmmaker ever made because he made about 600 at the Grand Guignol that disappeared. That he has 60 means there's 2 other series that I will bring up that he made. But the point is Phantomas is the one about the villain winning all, and the villain wins every battle he wins. There's a detective named Juve, which reminds me of Durand in Les Vampires, but Juve in Phantomas is the good guy. Now, there's a rock band based on Phantomas that doesn't really believe anything I don't about the film, because that's the mastery of how this is the one where the devil wins all. Even more so than Dr. Mabuse, and how in all his glory he rises to the top. This guy's already at the top. He can mimic himself as the lowest of low, the highest of high, and that if that offends you, he'll mimic yourself as him and tell yourself that that doesn't offend you. That's because he can get in and out of people, and he can shapeshift into almost anyone, and he's doing all these magic tricks that actually were and still legal to learn in like magic shops in France. And it's wild how in Europe they have this magic, but that when filmed, this looks not supernatural, as we are saying in the theater. We have to make it look real, that the supernatural cannot touch the theater, or some kind of line like that that he'd add to his 300-page script that he used to make all of his films. Now, that said, there's so many editing shots that don't make sense in this on purpose, because he's cutting from block to block as though he's predicting that there'll be a film Master of the House that'll be so blocky that it'll be cube to cube. And there's hardly any films that do these kind of like long take, deep focus shots, these deep focus shots already at the beginning of cinema, because he's kind of rejecting poetic realism and kind of reinventing formalism into the this is what's happening on the street of Paris before the war, and will go on in Les Vampires to be during the war, which there's no sign of war in any of this. So again, makes it almost apolitical to think there's a bad guy on the loose this bad, that later we have to make a film called Les Vampires to stop the Phantomas demons from overcoming even the Les Vampires demons and taking out this later hero Durand, which could have Durand stood up to Phantomas. That's a question I'm going to have to leave to all of you and move on to another film here. We're headed short of probably being okay with this segment, so I'm going to go on and say this is one I should have mentioned that comes out a little bit after Phantomas, and this is in Italy again, where we saw Inferno. But this is the Inferno, egregious, peak all combat movie war strategy. Everyone's clusterfucked with a movie cabaret. And it's Italy again, and they're pushing even the boundaries of Inferno, and it looked like they filmed hell itself with the extras of thousands that would have all had to wear demonic paintings. This one is even more thousands of people that wore demonic paintings just to be in a couple of seconds of this Cloud Atlas nightmare of Intolerance backwards, because Intolerance didn't come out until 1916, and this has about 17 plots at once, and if you're watching it carefully even the first time, you'll notice that an 18th story creeps in, and one of the other stories ties all the stories together, and storytelling wasn't even the hard part. launching these parts where these guys are marching on each other's shields was so trajectory of a calculus that they had to have back then that it makes sense that they all these war heroes were these inveritable mathematicians, and that while the makers of these movie, which I'm getting here to be Giovanni Pastrone, wrote and directed this. Well, he's an old friend, Pastrone, of the guy who invented Italian wild ass films even beyond the Inferno. And that's why the silent era is such an exciting time of cinema. Because without sound, they could have not captured one of the most deadly sounding crashes and bashes of this volcano movie they're making in Italy, and these sword and sandal epics they're making, and then Cabiria before even Birth of a Nation. Cabiria takes the award for the wild, most crazy, most inventive, reckless film that totally survives, and yet there's Italian films way more crazy list. Anyway, I like this one. I'm not even sure which part of the movie it's splicing with which part of the movie. It's like this Moses looking character, and down here's like this remnant of the Moloch pit, which was a Moloch use, really good in this, kind of like the one in Fritz Lang's Metropolis, which we'll cover later. But it looks like we're sailing right along. So I'm just going to say about Cabiria, that style of realism matched with the style of formalism is right up any Fellini biographer study, because he did a movie called Knights of Cabiria, which has this lady in it that's really good in Fellini movies, and she freaking backs it up with Knights of Cabiria as being a prostitute, My Life to Live style, but in kind of a comic way, and that there's no similarity between the films except perhaps that you could use the Fellini music from his movie if you lifted it out and put it on Cabiria. I don't know if the dialogue would match, that's an ancient rumor, but the music would actually play soothingly over Cabiria and other silent films, because they're cut to be tagged along with music, whether it be the guy in the theater playing a reel-to-reel soundtrack, or someone in the theater with an orchestra, or you're someone with a music instrument trying to keep up with Cabiria's music note liners. That most silent films have it. Oddly, ones that are even found that the silent film has been lost have led us to find strange releases on the internet. Or if you see a strange release of a film that's a silent film, keep it on a playlist of yours, keep it alive forever, download it, put it on other official sites. We've got to keep the history of silent film alive. And this one is the last silent film I'm going into for now, and this is a really good one called Phantom Carriage. Now, we've got here 1921. We're back in Sweden, although we never really left, because in Sweden in 1914, Ingeborg Holm comes out the same year as Cabiria, only it's a quiet solitude film about a man who's got a raging heart. Now, I won't say anything about Carl Dreyer's The President, but Carl Dreyer was the one behind Vampire, which is from 1932, which we haven't covered the sound film of that yet, but that it totally originates from this Swedish folklore that's about to open a bank on my Swedish civilization, is so over-involved with the mechanics of socialism in their country actually working, that they take these religious films to the actual peak and show them why they like to be oppressed with religion, because you get to see the coolest visions. And that brings us to the Phantom Carriage, which is actually Victor Seastrom again, which is who the one I mentioned when I was talking about Ingeborg Holm. But this one's interesting because there was a dream sequence in Wild Strawberries by Ingmar Bergman where he captures the Phantom Carriage dream sequence, or is it moment, exactly shot for shot as how it's supposed to be. And like Bergman kind of even deconstructs and reconstructs certain parts of that film to be modernized, but in the same glimpse as how every great modern and even postmodern director has a silent film reference in their film. I couldn't even begin to find them all, because some of them are so hidden that the director says, let me unhide it for you. But that there's directors that make silent films beyond the sound film can be interesting, because you can experiment with visual storytelling. And the Phantom Carriage has everything from Faust that we were talking about, everything from the Inferno, a dream sequence that's later going to be used in Wild Strawberries. If Bergman denies it or not, it doesn't matter. He loves the fact that it's a clip to another movie, even though he came up with it too. And that they're all in Sweden, and that they're all hanging out is really cool. And I think you just need to know that the Phantom Carriage is one of my all-time picks for that. If you can imagine that exact carriage going underwater and collecting things like Diamonds and stones and treasures. Can I come in a little bit later?
Huh?
Can I come a little bit later? I'm doing a recording.
Okay, remember this is your meds.
Okay, I'll be there in a minute.
Okay.
10 minutes. I knew we'd get knocked on, and I apologize for that because I know this is supposed to be a Harvard video and we're not supposed to have interruptions, but I had noticed that I had a medication to take for the osteoporosis in my back, so you'll have to forgive me. Everyone forgive me? Good, let's go. Phantom Carriage is one of the most wild, expressionistic, romantic, latently religious, and totally religious-defying horror films in all the history of creation that takes the ride of Faust to an underwater lair and everywhere else Death has to travel that night to take those that died on the trip to this guy that died. And Victor Seastrom saw it coming when he was in Wild Strawberries by Ingmar Bergman in that movie, saying, I liked it better when it was Ingberg home where I could just chill with my low-budget family. But then by the seventh seal, I knew everyone was doing the Phantom Carriage, and Bergman pulled it off the vest, but that I have to go see it as an award in a Bergman movie that changes Phantom Carriage into a lecture sauce that gets interrupted. That's totally priceless. All right, I got two more here. Two more, and I gotta go. Yeah, I'll have to be there by 3, so I'll be all right. Casablanca. This is an epic, amazing film. Michael Curtiz. He actually did two hours of Casablanca in 1942. And let me tell you, there is nothing better than film noir history having a chunk bit out of it by Hollywood itself going noir style when the style was already being condemned as un-American. The condemners of un-American cinema had been around since right when they put the production code in 1934 and Joseph Breen started. Now that he was part of the factor that destroyed everything with the House of Un-American Activities is not to mention that Casablanca took up arms against the Nazis around the time of Pearl Harbor, before all the Pearl Harbor movies had come out and blown everyone away. This is the one that predicts that they could have stopped it if they would have let more American soldiers into Europe, Eastern Europe, Western Europe, just coming into Europe. Because while the soldiers were there, they took care of their own. And he knew his girlfriend, Ingrid Bergman, who's in an Ingmar Bergman film, but they aren't really related. And anyway, she was older in that Ingmar Bergman film, and so was he. It was called Autumn Sonata. But in Casablanca, she goes for Bogey so hard that she'd leave the hero for him if he set him free. And despite all that, Bogey, he drinks it out to the point that he's not a prohibitionist. And whoever's playing on his piano is doing this really good, impressive stuff where he's trapped in this nightclub that all these Nazis are about to kill everybody in the bar, including a few people that Bogey has to kill before they get killed, but he wanted them dead anyway, because this is espionage front, man. This is the ultimate. And like the spy who falls in love with the girl, finds out her husband's still alive, and he was in a concentration camp, and he sends them both home and forces the Nazi to join his side. But the way it's done with one light chiaroscuro totally shows that there is film noir in the most Hollywood film, and the only reason they're cliches is because everyone has to see this film 15 times to know that you quote it the most, whether it's the most a wild version of why we got involved with World War II, which there were ground troops in 1940 of Americans in Europe already before The Great Dictator even came out, or they wouldn't have been able to make The Great Dictator, which was 2 years earlier. And this resolves around sound, the Take It Again Sam piano beat being a jazz age tune that almost got forgot until the 40s when this film came out. It's just one of the treasures that it led to the Marx Brothers Night in Casablanca, although theirs came out either before or after, is interesting too. And so we have to cut it short because we have been interrupted, but it wasn't at a score pointing low because I've got one more film to review, and then I'm going to take a total lecture from whoever it is that said I should have come earlier. But this is La Ventura, and this is a film that's like the adventure of Italy. And we already took you there with La Dolce Vita a little bit, and we already went there a little bit with Cabiria, but this is later in the 60s, when the Cannes Film Festival is now at stake because of what happened in 1959, and the French almost took all the French film awards when they wanted other countries to win them. Well, this won another year, and was another one that opted out, kind of, but nothing else was there to fulfill its greatness. And that's not really what always happens, but did happen only with this film, La Ventura. And that everyone regulated the Cannes Film Festival with people that almost got into boxing matches and throwing chairs and everywhere because about 3 people hated it. And then like there were about 20 people that defended it, and they were all serious critics. And then these 3 people that hated it, they were just yelling at him. And some other people were like, well, defend them if they hate it category, and none of them could. And that they pushed him out of the Cannes Film Festival, that the Cannes Film Festival didn't have to really regulate unruly people that were going out, though, when they'd all kind of got their dander back up. The Cannes was willing to say, well, the 20 critics that stuck up for it were the judges of the show, so we're just going to vote it in for them if they left. And they were all there, and they weren't even shaken, and they were like, we've gotten worse responses to picking better movies than this. And that's why I say, if you didn't like this movie just because it was Italian, well, forget it. It's all the romantic books ever in one. It's the chick that got lost in the book because the story doesn't talk about her anymore, but they don't know if she died or not, which isn't clear because nobody ever finds her again, but they don't know if she's lost or not, and they're just repeating, not showing the details of what happens to the first 2/3 of a movie, having one person as the movie star, and she disappears, and other movie stars move in on the guy that was dating her, but he doesn't know, and they don't know if she's alive or not, or gone, or had to go, and nobody knows why the film doesn't show her anymore, even though the few books and poetries that are based on it are like, well, she disappears from the context of the book, but in the movie, even more so, because there's not even a photograph really that can reflect on who we were watching the first third of the movie. And that's why it freaks some people out. They're like, well, how could you have someone disappear from your movie? That in the era of Psycho, even when the person that disappears from the movie, it makes sense because she's sort of dead now. And this is like, well, this isn't even a Psycho plot. This is like the girl walks off on an island. They don't know if they can admit she's lost or not, and they won't even reveal to the audience if she's lost or not. It's an appeal to modernism, this existential feeling that just because you're the whole star of the show doesn't mean you have to not or still come to this place that feels like you're gone because you're not there. But then again, nobody remembers who you were when you aren't there or were. So I'm going to give this one a mad modernist Italian wind up and say all the films I've reviewed are pretty good. But if you can't handle looking at a beautiful woman for the first hour, which she takes poses that aren't uncomfortable to watch but are somewhat scrutinized by the fact that she looks like a model in the film, and then watch the despair of a man who doesn't know if he should move on from her, whether she's there or not, is really profoundly still one of the greatest epics of an adventure you could have, with living through the crisis of not knowing if your main character's still there, even after seeing in other movies later by Americans and Italians alike who had Viti in their films. And I just think it's a tribute to all-time cinema that you can represent it in such a way that it's like, well, all it is a supermodel for an hour, and then the leftover friends she has for wherever she went. And then we see in another film that she's still alive, and we're all going, oh man, at least it wasn't that Psycho thing where someone in the film was acting like killing her, and we're still feeling it from Pierre Defoe, which is coming soon from the La Aventure camp of I found the desert island she's on and everything blew up, and it's like, that's not even what Antonioni was shooting for. He was shooting for those close-ups, those feel-goods, those roam-around camera angles, those look at the angles, underneath angles that are already starting to fruition in Casablanca, all the way to the war strategy of where we're going with war, that the women never get empowered in these things, and we don't know where we are in our cascades of insensitive fare. And that's why I like Phantom Carriage, because it takes us to the base of insensitive fare, and it's the cabaret that broke Phantomas at the same time, saying we are at the edge of all what's in us, out of us. And then Michelangelo Antonioni takes us all back in and say, but it comes from within, what is beyond, what's gone from us.